Hi, everybody. Welcome. We are so excited that you are here with us for the Rivalry webinar of the University of Michigan and the Ohio State University. This is a collaboration between the Michigan Daily, which is the student publication of the University of Michigan, and the Lantern, the student publication of the Ohio State University. We started this tradition a few years ago where we get together on a collaborative project, which involves publishing a print edition of both of our papers where we feature articles from incredible student journalists, and also a fundraising drive, which I'm a little proud to say, I don't want to stress it, but the Lantern currently is winning the fundraising drive. So we hope that you will consider giving to this endeavor. It goes to support the most incredible student journalists, working in the business today. And we are so excited to have some of them here with us who are going to talk about their experience in covering the rivalry game, which is Michigan versus Ohio State, what they're looking forward to this year, and maybe what you can look forward to in terms of their coverage. So I'm going to ask them to turn their cameras on if they wouldn't mind. Welcome. So I'm going to ask you guys to introduce yourselves. I'm going to start with Charlie from Charlie, I'm not sure how to pronounce your last name, so if you can help me with that, and just give us an idea as to what you do at the University of Michigan.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Nicole. My name is Charlie Papalardo, and currently I'm a senior sports editor for the Michigan Daily, and I cover the football beat with John and two other people. And so that's really just been a blast, and it's been a great time on the Daily.
Awesome. John?
Hi, Nicole. I'd like to echo what Charlie said. We're very thankful to be here. I'm also a senior sports editor for the Michigan Daily, senior here at the University of Michigan, covering the football beat with Charlie and two other great guys.
Wonderful. And Lauren?
Hi, thank you, Nicole. My name is Lauren Luderman. I'm the sports editor of The Lantern. I'm a senior at Ohio State, and I cover Ohio State football.
And certainly not least, Jayla.
Thank you, Nicole. Yeah, so I'm Jayla Van Horn. I'm the assistant sports editor for The Lantern, and I also cover the football beat with Lauren.
Well, this is a pretty exciting time. I mean, I think certainly both teams have a week to go before they face off in this rivalry opportunity. But I know it's something that's been on your minds probably since the beginning of the season. And I'm curious, when you get into a position like being a sports editor for a major student publication like this, how do you kind of envision your preparation for a game like this? And how are you getting started already? And maybe, Lauren, you could start us off.
Sure. So I'd say this game in particular is a little bit different than the others. Obviously, not only is it our rival, it is the biggest game of the year. So preparation starts when the season begins. I definitely keep a closer eye on all things Michigan than I do, not to, belittle any other schools, but like Minnesota, I think it's most important to know everything that's going on with Michigan. And really starting this week, I paid close attention to the Penn State Michigan game, and just kind of doing your research, making sure that you know the key players, you know what's been going on in their season, you know what's been going on in their program, and that'll only continue to escalate as we move on throughout the week. And then specifically next week when we get to talk to Ryan Day for the first time about Michigan, because he's pretty closed lips leading up to the game.
Charlie, how are things in that school up north? How do you guys get prepared?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think I kind of want to echo a lot of what Lauren said, which is that it's different than any other game that you're going to cover throughout the year. And what that looks like is from the beginning of the year, I've kind of like her found myself watching more Ohio State games. And in a lot of respects, you get to kind of have more fun just watching football when you watch a team like Ohio State, because when you're watching Michigan, of course, you're planning on, okay, what am I going to write about it? Do I have a flash that I have to publish immediately after the game? Whereas when you're watching a team like Ohio State, you can just watch good football and have fun with it. So it's kind of like that difference. One, you get to watch as like, yes, as a journalist, you want to know kind of what to prepare for when you're covering a game like Ohio State, but also it's just something that you get to follow throughout the year because you know it's going to matter, but not follow like you're analyzing every play.
Well, Jayla, I think it's certainly a gift that we have, the fact that both these teams are undefeated at this point and that they're coming into it number 2 and number 3, I believe, in the BCS. But you can't know that to begin with. So as you recognize that the season's going on and both these teams are playing at such a high level, when does it start to kick in that you're going to be covering what is arguably the most watched game of the year?
I think it's starting to kick in right now with obviously Rivalry Edition coming out. We've been talking a lot about that. We're also going to play a touch football game with the Michigan Daily. So I think it's starting to, in a sense, kick in right now. But I'm excited for it. Last year I wasn't able to be a part of like the actual rivalry. I wasn't at the stadium, but I was outside of it, volunteering with the Home Depot. So now I'll get to be at the big house. So I'm super excited for that. It'll be much funner than volunteering for the Home Depot.
And John, can you give us a sense of, how many people you guys will have covering this game? And does it change in terms of how you've covered previous games?
Certainly, yeah. So for our, beat specifically here at the Michigan Daily, we have 4 full-time football beat writers. But one thing that I find so striking isn't just, the camaraderie that we have with one another and our ability to cover the team for 4 entire seat or 4 people together for an entire season, excuse me. But just enough people in the press box, you can tell that, the game brings out a different attitude amongst people. The cameras come out, the lights are a bit brighter, and it just becomes,
it's an interesting relationship that we get to share, I think. And I did forget to introduce myself. I'm Nicole Kraft. I am a journalism professor here at Ohio State. I also direct our Sports and Society Initiative, and I help advise our sports section of the Lantern. There's so much animosity, if you could say it, between fans perhaps of Ohio State and of Michigan. But this chance that we've had to work collaboratively with each other, that, we build this mutual project, we get to see each other's work up close and personal. We, as you mentioned, we're going to talk a little bit about the upcoming touch football game. What does it mean to you guys to have this relationship with another student publication that is operating at such a high level and is so recognizable in the sports world, to be able to tie your work together with each other? And John, maybe you could start.
Certainly, yeah. So I think, student sports journalism is a bit of an interesting place to be. At times it can feel a little isolating when you're dealing with people who are professionals in their field and their entire lives revolve around this. I joke with Charlie sometimes. It feels funny that we go from one of media availability to class, then to covering a game, and then back to your, project that you have for History 440 the next day. And just being able to collaborate with Ohio State and the Lantern has been so wonderful because you really get to see just kind of the broader community that you reside within as a student journalist. And to see their fabulous work is always so gratifying and just wonderful to see them succeed and us as well.
Absolutely. Lauren, what's it been like for you in putting together this Rivalry Edition?
I'd have to agree with everything that John said. I wasn't really sure what to expect coming in, but it's been fun. I think that we get along more than some might anticipate, just like normal people, they're writing about Michigan, we're writing about Ohio State, and that's really the only way that we differ. So I found it to be very collaborative. I think hearing their sides of things is interesting because, growing up as a part of like Buckeye Nation as a young girl, I never would have dreamed of reading one of their stories or whatever. So really being able to kind of be actually in that situation, I think it's refreshing almost to be more in the know about Michigan.
And Jayla, it feels like there's, this kind of reflects the professionalism of both of our programs, that, we're not fans and we're not, just merely, I don't mean to imply anything about, our wonderful students and our alumni, but we have to transcend that feeling of being Buckeyes or that feeling of being Wolverines in order to produce the most professional product. So how do you approach it?
I think as you mentioned, like growing up, like always being like a Buckeye fan, being from Cleveland, Ohio, you grow up rooting for that team, obviously. But I think sort of being out in this new environment, you kind of see how everyone functions in a sense. So like, for example, being in the press box, right? You're not able to cheer. I knew that obviously going into it, but then once you're like in that moment, you realize like, okay, I can't cheer, right? Even if it's a touchdown by like Marvin Harrison, I can't cheer. So I think sort of navigating that, being able to be around so many professionals, obviously being in your class, sport journalism, having people come in and talk to us about ways to navigate this industry has been super helpful.
And Charlie, what's been your favorite part about this collaboration that we've been able to enjoy together?
I mean, I think the thing about the collaboration, it took a lot of work, right, on everybody's end. It was a big project, but kind of seeing it all come together and seeing like all the great articles that I get to read from my colleagues at the Daily, from everyone at the Lantern, it's just been really exciting, right? And it's not necessarily just like that the stories are great. It's that you get to see people take different angles to things. Like in the Lantern, they did the interview of someone who grew up in Michigan, grew up a Michigan fan, and went to Ohio State. That's a cool angle that we really wouldn't have thought to do. And so certain things like that, taking a different approaches, because it's not just that like Michigan and Ohio State are different because everyone knows that, but it's like from those differences, what's kind of different about the journalism that gets produced, all right? And kind of what are the intricacies of that? What makes it good? What are the good parts about that difference? And what can you kind of learn from the other organization?
Absolutely. And I do want to remind everyone who's with us today, the rivalrygame.com is the site where you can see all the stories that were published from both the Michigan Daily and the Lantern. And perhaps a little bit more importantly, you can donate money to either one or both of these programs, should you wish, to support really wonderful, incredibly professional, just outstanding student journalism. So we really hope that you will take a look at the site and that you will be generous over there when you get a chance to visit it. We are going to ask our student journalists to just step to be at the ready, but to turn off their cameras for a little bit while we welcome our other guests. I do see some questions are coming into the chat, and I hope that you will continue to submit your questions. We very much will get to those. And I see one of them specifically was addressed to our student journalists. We're going to bring them back in, so we're going to get a chance. But right now I'm going to invite our other guests, if they could turn their cameras on now, so that we can start talking a little bit about the history of this rivalry and what it has meant to some of the people who've been involved in it. Hey, Charlie. Hello, Tim. Hello, Michael.
Hello.
We should have one more coming on to join us, but maybe we can start and introduce and there's Cardell Jones. Welcome. We are so excited you guys are here with us. Charlie, maybe you could start with our introductions and tell us what your involvement is here at Ohio State and how you plan to spend the game.
How's it going, everybody? I hope you can hear me okay. I am Charlie McDermott. I'm a senior at Ohio State, and in this panel, I'm representing Block O, representing the students, the fans, and I will be spending the game at the big house, and I am so excited to head up there because, even as an Ohio State guy, that is a bucket list stadium, so I am happy to be witnessing that rivalry game live.
We have two amazing journalists with us. Michael, can you share your relation to this game?
Yeah, well, I certainly didn't play in it. I worked at the Michigan Daily, 92 to 96. Was covered at the football team along with other teams and became editor-in-chief. And then I covered Michigan for the Detroit Free Press, and I wrote a book called War as They Knew It, Woody Hayes, Bo Schembechler, and America in a Time of Unrest, which is all about the rivalry and what was happening on campuses in the 60s and 70s. And I've been a senior writer at Sports Illustrated for 12 years now, and I'll be there in a couple of weeks. Looking forward to it.
Awesome. Tim May, you have certainly covered your fair share of this rivalry.
Yes. 40 I think I've covered 40 games. Well, actually I've covered more than that because I helped cover back in the late 70s, early 80s, and then I took over the Ohio State beat in 1984 at the Columbus Dispatch, and until I retired from the Dispatch in 2018, I covered every game, and then I got dragged back into this thing by LettermanRow.com and have been covering it ever since too. So that's 40, 43, 45, 48 some odd games I think I've been to. I moved up to Columbus in 1976 to further my education at Ohio State because my parents had moved up here and from Texas. And 1976 was the first game I saw live, but by far not the first game I ever saw because 1968 really intrigued me about what this rivalry was all about. And I told the 1973 team at their reunion back several weeks ago that 10-10 tie, man, and everything that came before and after that, if that 10-10 tie didn't get you going about what this rivalry meant and what this war meant, then you weren't paying attention. So, I've very much enjoyed covering this rivalry through the years.
Fantastic. And there's only one of us on this call who actually has thrown a ball in this game, and that would be you, Cardell. It's the stuff of legends, the fact that you came in the fourth quarter and led this team to a victory that ended up in a national championship. What was it like to be part of the game?
First and foremost, thanks for having me, guys. See some familiar faces on here. And I think it's legendary. I think when you think about growing up in East Side, inner city Cleveland, that's all you really know. It was before the days of social media and big TV deals where Midwest football was all you knew. And this time of the year, you was forced to not only see it, you was forced to engage in that environment of Michigan, Ohio State. And I come from a tradition-rich community, the Glenville community, where we had a lot of guys who played football, there and had an opportunity to play at Michigan and Ohio State. So I saw how the rivalry not just divided my household at times, but the community leading up into the weeks. I can remember vaguely where I was versus the 1-versus-2 game, the first one with Troy Smith, and the list goes on with great players on both sides of the ball. So to be a part of that and to have opportunity to etch my name in that history and that tradition and that rivalry, I think is one of my greatest accomplishments. If I had to rank him professionally, it would definitely be up there. And even to this day, the gold pants that I got from that Michigan game is some of the ones I really care about the most. I mean, honestly, I was fortunate enough to be a part of 4 teams that, went 4-0 versus them. But the ones in 14 is the ones that hold near dear to my heart because that's the only one I actually got to play in.
Absolutely. Michael, this seems to be a tradition of streaks where you have one team that wins, the next team, several games. We have another team that wins several games. So I'm curious, in the time that you've been covering it, what's your perception of what creates such an incredible rivalry, no matter who, even in the John Cooper years when there was not a lot of Ohio State victory per se, there was still an intense rivalry. And the same thing when we had, there were several times in the recent past when Michigan was unsuccessful against Ohio State, but this rivalry perseveres. What is it about it that's so magical?
Well, I think it has sort of, the great rivalries that usually have a few elements. There can be a bit of a class war. There can be a bit like just great football teams. There can be history. This just has all of those things, and I mean, Army Navy is a great rivalry, but I don't think they're going to be in the playoff, so it's a different deal. And so much of it, I think what has fascinated me is that there's such a psychological component entering the game. And, teams do bring baggage into it. They do bring history into it. John Cooper probably had better teams than Michigan had 5 times and lost, and that to me is really what's going to be so interesting this year, because I think Michigan probably has a better team, but not a lot better team, and can Ohio State sort of put the last 2 years behind and win this game. And that's actually what I thought. It is a rivalry of shrieks, but Cardell, when you were around, it wasn't particularly a close rivalry for most of that time, and it wasn't that interesting. That wasn't like one team just found a way psychologically. Ohio State was just a lot better. So I think it's fun that both teams are great again.
Absolutely. Tim, I'm curious, in terms of approaching a rivalry game like this, does it change for you, with the amount of history that you have with this experience as you prepare to cover another one? What are some of the factors that go into your coverage and have across time?
Yeah, well, back when I was writing prolifically, I would probably write about 30 stories in the week, back with the Dispatch and stuff. And here, what really bugged me about this was covering this rivalry, because I got to see Alabama-Auburn live back in the early 60s with my dad and my older brother. And I got to cover the Texas-Oklahoma game 3 times when I was a sports editor of the Lufkin News back in the early 70s. But what set this one apart was, these teams really don't like each other. It kind of reminds me of Alabama-Auburn and the vim and vigor and vinegar involved in this whole thing. But it kind of bothered me as that was going on, because obviously I covered the entire John Cooper era. 2-10-1, I think, is what it's known. I once described John Cooper's era as a beautiful scarlet tie with a big mustard splotch right in the middle of it, because several times it cost Ohio State probably national championships, 2 in particular. But what always got me is how, you're covering it, no matter how you twist it, from the Ohio State angle. So if Ohio State loses and it's a great game, gloomy gush. I mean, the sun doesn't come up tomorrow, but it did, as you found out as you covered it. But it could have been a great game. And, as it went on and on, I just started thinking, well, this isn't really giving this game its correct shrift if all you center your coverage on is the team you're covering either got beat or won. Do you follow my drift there? Mm-hmm. And but you still had to cover that aspect of it. And but it kind of mellowed me in the sense of quote, a favorite in it one way or the other. I just appreciated the effort that went into it. Watching Cardale, Cardale cold as a refrigerator, right? Coming off the bench there in that game in 2014. And mainly Cardale's main ambition that afternoon was to keep Ohio State from getting beat, right, Cardale? The magic really came the next 3 games for him. But it's just seeing a guy like that rise to the occasion, no matter which side of the game it's on, is what's always intrigued me. So, yeah, I mean, I think when you're covering it and you're trying to stay objective, but you're covering from one team's angle or the other, you don't quite enjoy it as much as if you're watching it on television and you don't really give a damn who wins.
Well, it seems like being in the room, Cardale, would be even more so of what Tim's describing. And I'm curious, how much animosity is there between Ohio State and Michigan, especially in leading up to the game? And I know, I've been in the Woody Hayes Athletic Center. The countdown clock starts the minute the game's over. I know some of the traditions that go on there, but what does it feel like to be inside that space?
I think before I get to that, Tim and Michael makes great points about just the rivalry and what it really consists of outside of the sport. But I think it's just at the end of the day, it is a big time. Hate is such a strong word, but it is a huge disliking of everything that concerns that program when they come to sports. I mean, you look at the history before the rivalry became a rivalry to them, and some of the things that they would say about Ohio State, or you talk about the the battle between Michigan and Ohio for a piece of land for Toledo. You talk about Bo Schembecker leaving and taking a Michigan job and coaching against his best friend for the next 10, 15, 20 years, whatever it was. And everything that consists of a rivalry you have in those 2 programs. And I think with me, more so of anything, I think what created that culture of a strong disliking in our facility was, one, we always had majority of the athletes in the program was from Ohio, so they understood it. 2, our coaches always had an Ohio tie. If it's going back to Woody Hayes and probably coaches even before him, I can't think off the top of my head. And so it was always instilled in us that you don't lose to this team. You don't you just don't. I mean, outside of everything that usually on a line when you plan this team road to the Big Ten championship game, right? Now it's the college football playoffs. Now it's, or before it was major bowl games, the BCS era. So outside of everything you grew up hating about them or not liking about them, you have major implications in your career on the line as well. So it's a hostile environment all week leading up to that game. And I would imagine, I wouldn't say that the team is looking past Minnesota, but I can tell you right now, these guys' eyes are set on, the big one next week, because at the end of the day, the Big Ten still run through Michigan. And I think it's just always a factor where you look at last year, like a guy like CJ Stroud, first thing he said about, his legacy was like, he was going to be known as a guy who never beat Michigan, right? Like, outside of all the great things he have accomplished on the football field and off the football field, right? And even past that in the playoffs and things that he's able to do, right? That's always going to be a stain on your resume. And I can go back to times where I shared locker rooms with NFL guys who we all had those conversations about the game. So I think it's installed in a lot of us from birth, and I think we do a really good job of being from Ohio and really getting the outer state student athletes to really adapt that mindset as well.
Absolutely. Well, Charlie, that hostility is certainly evident in the stands, and it's part of the Blocko motivation and tradition to bring that that fan dedication, whether it's a home game, as we talked about, every game is a home game for Ohio State, or at least that's what Blocko tries to make it. And so I'm curious, how do you approach a rivalry like this, to cheer on your team, recognizing, especially this year, you're going to be in pretty hostile territory. How do you balance those things?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. I really like the whole, every game is a home game. We kind of tried to embody that when we went out to South Bend earlier in the year. A way that we prepare as a student section, we're not the team. So we are able to kind of look ahead, as to where the team really can't look ahead as much. They're kind of, you kind of have to take it one step at a time. As Urban Meyer once said, the best thing about being, whatever and O is the chance to win that next game, 4-0 to be 5-0. And, in this case, at that point, this week it's, to be 11-0, the next week would be 12-0. So we're able to look ahead as students and look to this game. Every year that I've been a student, with exception to freshman year, considering that game didn't happen and we weren't able to be in the stands anyways if it did, we looked forward to this game from the start. You wanted to be in those stands. We also do for both student sections, Blocko North and Blocko South, if it was a home game, we would have kids get painted up and they would have some sort of letter on their, torso, and it would say something. It's just part of the passion that we have for each game, for this rivalry. And we intend on, kind of beefing it up every single year that we have this game at home. And it means so much more this year that Blocko has the opportunity to bring people out to the big house to cheer on that team in a very hostile environment. There's one thing that we kind of do have to be aware of, is kind of what you say and what you do when you're in Ann Arbor. I think that as much as you don't like these people, as much as you don't like the team, you don't want to be the person that causes something to go haywire. So how I intend on approaching that game is getting down here Friday and leaving Saturday morning, cheering on my team, being, the best Buckeye that I could possibly be, and being a great representation of my school when we head up to Ann Arbor.
Excellent. Michael and Tim, I'm curious what you've seen in the last, couple years, that, how you kind of view these most recent games as being part of the rivalry, what they've reflected in the rivalry. Here at Ohio State, the fact that they've lost back-to-back, you think that that's a pretty dramatic event and it's pretty distressing. Obviously, there's a much different feeling up north, but what are you seeing in terms of how the play has changed, how the rivalry has changed? The coaches changed, the players changed, the teams stay the same, but how is it differed in the last, let's say 5 years? Maybe you could start with us, Mike.
Yeah. Well, from a football perspective, it's kind of a fascinating thing that Jim Harbaugh did, that he really, while everybody was going to these aerial attacks, particularly Ohio State, he kind of went retro with Ohio State in mind, and it worked. I mean, the last 2 years, it's not so much that Michigan had a better team than Ohio State. They had created a team that was a great matchup against Ohio State. And I think Michigan, after all those years, Michigan fans have been known to be a little bit too proud of their school, to put it kindly. And they had a good, 18 years of having that beaten out of them, and it's back. It is definitely back. And so I don't remember the rivalry actually ever being quite as contentious as it is right now. Like, even if you go back to the 70s, one thing about that era was that because Bo and Woody did have a pre-existing relationship, a lot of those guys felt like, but for the grace of God, I could have ended up on the other team. There was a little bit of a camaraderie there, as competitive as it was. I don't think there's a lot of camaraderie right now between Jim Harbaugh and Ryan Day. It's pretty nasty. So that's definitely been a change that I've seen.
Ben, what about you?
Yeah, it's pretty nasty. It just shows you the depth of the rivalry. Is that we know what's going on with Michigan right now, and some of their fans, et cetera, basically immediately tried to blame it on Ryan Day and Ohio State for turning them in, or, I call it the great snitch hunt. They're still trying to figure out who turned them in on the Connor Stallions thing. But clearly it's been cleared up now that Ohio State was not part of that, at least in the turn-in phase. But that just shows you how deep it goes. And, I've always said that I've always thought that rivalries become more enhanced when there are streaks involved, not one you win this year and then the other team wins the next year. And we all saw, Gary Moeller making that comment when during the John Cooper years about their big rival actually was Michigan State, which that's Gary Moeller, a former captain at Ohio State, who was the head coach at Michigan. And very interesting. And I think Lloyd Carr, he didn't really fight that the way I understand it, but the way I remember it. But the bottom line is, all it takes is a streak or a bad luck run for you to realize really what the rivalry is all about. And, like Charlie just talked about, or Michael just talked about, when Jim Harbaugh showed up, he tried to play the way they're playing now. He tried to play that way in 2015, 2016. He missed it by this much, right? On that little keeper by JT Barrett. My point was, then he figured out maybe I better go a little more giddy up, a little more up tempo. My point is he tried to sort of meld into becoming Ohio State to a certain extent. That didn't work. Now they're back to that physical game, and you can't argue with what they've done the last 2 seasons, but it has brought Ohio State fans back to reality. I mean, Michigan won only 2 times in the first 20 years of this century. That's crazy when you think about it, especially when I first started covering this team full-time in 1984. And yeah, I mean, I think there's a rancor here that's palpable, and it always has been. And it's, like I said, it goes back to that 73 team. They tied 10-10. Ohio State had gone to the Rose Bowl the year before, and they had decided that, now teams could go to the Rose Bowl 2 years in a row or more, finally. And it was Ohio State that got voted by its peers in the Big Ten after that game to go to the Rose Bowl to represent the Big Ten. And of course, that really drove Michigan fans crazy also. So all these kind of things that have just, picked at that scab every year, one way, one form or fashion, and brought it back to life. But I really think you can't get any bigger than 11-0, 11-0 if these two teams take care of business this week. Just like in 2006, 11-0, or just like last year, 11-0, 11-0, and playing for it all as far as the Big Ten East is concerned. I don't know how much more you can put on the line, but then you throw in the little sprinkling now of the Connor of Stallions Gate, and it's really enhanced it. I'm not sure I even answered your question.
That's okay. And we're definitely going to get to a bit more about the current challenges that Michigan is facing. But I did want to give you a chance, Cardell, to talk a little bit about what you're seeing in this year's team. There was obviously there's been criticism of Ohio State this season. They started what could be construed as slowly, despite the fact that they're undefeated. Michigan seems to have dominated every game. There was strength of schedule questions. So how do you kind of see both of these teams at this point, and how do they compare maybe with teams that you have either seen or been involved with previously?
Unbiasedly, I mean, I had an opportunity to cover both of these teams all year round with my CBS analysts current gig, and I've seen the trends of Michael said it. Michigan has transformed their football program to a team that's built to play in November. Built that's playing this part of the country when it's late, and the weather is going to determine if you can continue to throw the ball downfield. But we're going to rely on our front seven on both sides of the ball to win games for us, and that formula has worked for them for the past couple of years, especially against Ohio State. So they're keeping that up, and I don't think this Michigan team is as good as the one last year, but they're still a good team. You can't deny it, and I guess the media talks about the strength of schedule as being weak, which it is, but they're still dominating and taking care of business as they're supposed to do. Now, if their strength of schedule was this week and is winning games 20-23, then we have a conversation. But they're taking care of business and they're doing it the way that they know how to do it. And on the flip side of Ohio State, you want to look at a quote unquote slow start. We, coming in with trying to break in a new quarterback, a lot of new guys up front, a lot of still answers need to be questions of the up front with the offensive linemen and things like that. But the defense is doing good. I don't think they're necessarily having a slow start, but people are so used and accustomed to the Dwaynes, the JTs, and the CJs and Justins, and that offense putting up 45, 50, 60 points a game in in shootouts of a 55 to 48 game, where now they don't need to score many points because their defense is so dominant. I think they finally gave up a 20-yard play this past week versus Michigan State. And but if you see what they've been able to do to hold teams to, it got to be less than 10 to 12 points on average. I don't know the exact number. We're not used to seeing that old-fashioned silver bullet football, which I think they have gotten back to over the last year and a half, 2 years. And the offense, I wouldn't say it's taken a step back, but not having as much firepower on offense consistently isn't a knock on the overall team because they don't have to do that. Right. Do I think Ohio State can get into a shootout with any team in the country potentially? I do think so, not because of their offense, because I think their defense will ultimately stand tall. Is this the best Ohio State team better than last year? I don't think so. I think the defense is better, but overall as a team, I don't think it's better. But I think this team has a chance to beat Michigan. I think this Michigan team has a chance to beat Ohio State. So that's a great thing about rivalries as well. When you go into this final week of, this is rivalry week next week all around the country, all the records, all that stuff go out the window anyway. I'm pretty sure it's been times where you go into these games and said, no way Michigan got a chance, and they pull out an upset, and vice versa. They say, no way Ohio State got a chance, and they pull out an upset. So I'm just excited to see it.
Absolutely. Charlie, you mentioned that, of course, you came during the COVID year when there was not a rivalry game. And then, you have not experienced you've not had a winning experience, where the rest of us, as Tim noted, we've had many years of winning experiences. What would it mean to you, two sides of this, what would it mean to you if you left here and Ohio State did not ever beat Michigan? And what would it mean to you if they do beat Michigan?
That's another great question for me. It's true. I have not witnessed an Ohio State win as a student at Ohio State, but I've been a Buckeye fan all my life, and when you want to date back to 2002, I feel like Ohio State has been sort of blessed in the amount of wins that we've gotten in this rivalry. But back with that question, it means so much to me. I feel like a lot of what students do, especially with the fall semester, is it revolves around football. That whole weekend revolves around Ohio State football, and you're really paying attention every single day, every other day, just, what people are saying, how the standings are, what's the other side doing. I find myself paying more attention to Michigan than I'd like to admit nowadays. If I were to graduate Ohio State and Ohio State would not, come out with a win, I'd feel a little bit defeated. But the most important thing to remember is that the sun's going to rise the next day, and you're going to go back exactly a year from then, and you're going to hit the field again. And that's how I see it. That's how I saw it last year. I soaked it in, and I said, we're taking the field again the following year. And, back to going off what Cardale said, the talent everything that we've said throughout the season kind of goes out the window in that game, because either team, they're coming for blood. You're going to win that game, and a lot of the stuff goes out the window, and it is all about that 60 minutes of football. If that answers your question.
Absolutely. All right, Tim May, what's been your favorite edition of this rivalry and why?
2006. I mean, for example, how could you beat that? Two undefeated teams, game of the century. It's labeled as the week goes on. Although I think last year, but this year could be games of the century. So maybe they ought to change that moniker. Then on Friday, I'm talking to my friend Angelique Shingalis, who's covered Michigan for a long time up there for the Detroit Free Press, Detroit News. And all of a sudden her phone rings and she had to buzz out and comes back. She goes, "You're not going to believe this. We think Bo Schembechler died." I mean, are you kidding me? And so, basically in the newspapers, by Friday, usually of those kind of weeks, you've got everything written you're going to write. and you're going to enjoy the Friday afternoon before the storm hits. And instead, we all jumped on the bicycle and started writing stories about Bo Schembechler and Woody Hayes, ad nauseum. And then, boy, the game the next day did not disappoint. One of the great games ever in the series. Ohio State prevails in Ohio Stadium, but you still get chills from that. And one other quickie: Ohio State 1987. Ohio State fires Earl Bruce on Monday of the game. On Sunday, Rick Bay was over at the Woody Hayes Athletic Center, which had just opened that year, by the way, and was explaining how we had run a story in the paper on that Sunday morning of how we expected Earl Bruce to be fired. And Rick Bay was over there, the athletic director, saying that's not going to happen. That hadn't happened, blah, blah, blah. So anyway, got all my stories for that, from Ohio State, because you only got to interview them one time a week back then in the Michigan week. Went to the Michigan press conference. We had our own airplanes back then, flew up there, fly back. And my wife, who was working at home then, had left me a note on the counter when I got back. And this was before Twitter, fellas, and the internet. And the note said, Bruce fired, Bay resigns, get on it. And then, of course, Ohio State, with Earl Bruce fired, but he still got to coach the game, they go up there wearing their headbands, Earl or Bruce, whatever, you decide to write on it, and pull off one of the great upsets in the history of the game. So like these guys have been saying, Charlie was saying, you don't really know what's going to happen in this game. You just think you do.
Absolutely. Cardell, what's your favorite incarnation of this?
I think we just talk about moments, and it's crazy to say that my moment is not even with me being in it. But in 2012, I think that year meant a lot to us because my freshman year couldn't play for a bowl game for other reasons that guys did before I was there. And at the time, my roommate, actually all through college, Tyvis Powell, and Michael made a comment earlier about the games wasn't as close. When I was playing, they actually were the team that Michigan just wasn't that good, but they always played us really, really hard. They had opportunity to go for two. It was 42-41. They just scored, no more time. And they went for two. And long story short, my roommate ended up picking the thing off, to seal the win. And, I think that goes back into, you see so many people in those games on both sides of the ball make their names in those games. And you see what it do for their careers. I mean, just clearly I'm going to remember more guys from the Ohio State side, but, Chris Olave was known as the Michigan killer, and Tyvis started his career at that point. And I just saw what that confidence did for him fall into that spring because he wasn't able to play for the postseason. So no Big Ten championship or anything like that, which we was rounded up another potential national championship. That was a BCS era. And usually the two undefeated teams go to the championship. But I think that was my favorite moment because I was so happy for him. And I knew how much work he put into that to get on the field and to be in that position, and for them to trust him to be in that position as a freshman. I think that was huge, and he came up big. So I think that's my favorite moment.
That's awesome.
Hey, by the way, Nicole, Tyvis Powell still has that football. He still has a piece of Michigan property. He kept that one in the interception against Alabama the next year. Isn't that right, Cardale?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I mean, why wouldn't you?
Why wouldn't you? Michael, what about you?
I think it's just thinking about that as you asked. It's actually a moment that happened at a basketball game between Michigan and Ohio State in 2002 or 2001, excuse me, when Ohio State had a long, labored search for a new football coach and settled upon Jim Tressel, and he came out, and that's the night I was standing right there. I remember him saying, "You'll be proud of our team in the community, in the classroom, and in whatever number of days on that football field in Ann Arbor." And the crowd went nuts. And I really remember thinking they're going to win that game. It changed the rivalry right there because he was, Cooper was trying to escape how much it mattered. And you just can't do that in Columbus. I mean, it's different. It's different in Columbus than it is in Ann Arbor. Harbaugh started 0-5 against Ohio State, would have been 0-6 if they didn't have a COVID outbreak, and kept his job. You don't start 0-5 against Michigan and keep your job at Ohio State. That's not going to happen. And so for Tressel to come in and just let everyone know, I get it, I embrace it, we're going to be ready for it. he came through, and that was really the hallmark of those next few years, was that Ohio State just had exactly the psychological edge, the extra play. I remember in 06, they had that, like, what was it, that the double, the handoff lateral or whatever it was in the end zone. They just knew how to win that game, and so that's kind of what I take, is that that's when the psychological edge shifted from Michigan to Ohio State.
Hey, Nicole, a little footnote there too. I mean, John Cooper started 0-4 against Michigan, and then in 1992 it was a 13-13 tie. And Gordon Gee, now, as Michael just pointed out, if you keep it in mind, Gordon Gee went through the press box and basically was telling us this tie is one of our greatest wins ever, and that's kind of what he meant. The streak was broken. I mean, yeah, it's really run the gamut, man. The emotions.
For sure. All right, I'm going to ask our students to come back on if they wouldn't mind for the last few minutes that we have, because I do think that it's time for us to, Cardell just segued us pretty beautifully about, there was a controversy with Ohio State. We had Tattoo-gate. Now we're in the midst of another controversy, and we would be remiss if we didn't kind of talk about where we are with the situation with Jim Harbaugh, what effect it might have on the game. And we have questions here about the coverage of it. And so maybe Charlie, you could start talking with us about how the Michigan Daily has covered this story, what it's been like to cover it, and kind of maybe where you see it going as we get closer to the game.
Yeah, absolutely. I think really the moment that this scandal, that everything with it dropped, it not only became the biggest story on Michigan and Michigan athletics, but it kind of became the biggest sports story for a few weeks in the nation. And so kind of being on the scene there was a really interesting moment. And the tension all of a sudden, like Jim Harbaugh press conferences are always kind of lackadaisical. He'll tell you stories, start talking about Newton's laws of gravity. All of a sudden, they became very serious, right? And the SID would come out and say, we're here to talk about Purdue. Please ask questions about Purdue. But of course, as journalists, right, we're not just going to ask about Purdue. We have to ask. It would be like we wouldn't be doing our jobs if we didn't ask him questions about this. And so I think covering this has been interesting because Jim Harbaugh can't explicitly say anything, but it's like in these allusions that he'll make, like, or that you get the real answers, right? And so like a few days ago, somebody else asked him about his trial, and he didn't necessarily answer the question. And then all of a sudden, 2 minutes later, he was like, well, when I was in 10th grade, I took an American civics class and I learned about due process. And I think due process is really important, right? And so he won't say anything explicit. He won't tell you anything like that. But it's just these like subtle little things where you kind of get like the truth, right? And there was another one where Jesse Minter, a journalist in the room, asked him, there was an athletic article that came out that said that 97% of college coaches thought that Michigan went too far. And he starts answering the question. He goes, yeah, well, I read that, some said that this happened and some said, oh, well, we did that. But then he realized that he wasn't supposed to say that. And so he went around and kind of like tried to go back on his steps. So it's been interesting because you can't get anything explicit, but it's like in these implicit moments where you kind of realize what they're thinking.
Absolutely. And, Jayla, it's interesting. When we did have the circumstance here with Tattoo-gate, that was a Lantern staff that broke that. It was actually, we had Zach Meisel and Jimmy Olsen were the ones that broke that story, even despite, the challenges that it presented to the university and the losses that subsequently came from it. From your perspective, as you watch the Michigan Daily kind of breaking a story like this and recognizing that also the Lantern has to cover a story like this, what's it like knowing that, these are real people's lives, but it's also a story that has to transcend whatever rivalry we may feel with each other?
Yeah, so just to give props to the Michigan Daily, they did a great job covering that story. When I first saw the news, it was actually on my Instagram on ESPN. First thing I did was send it to Lauren and was like, I feel so bad for the Michigan Daily. Then I'm like, wait, we have to cover this too. And so obviously it was a lot. It was definitely a lot to take in at the moment. And it was also so much news coming out. I'm like, okay, what is real, what is fake, right? Because you don't want to publish something that isn't accurate. So I think getting that information from the correct source and then putting the right information out there has been the biggest thing. But Lauren has definitely done a great job with staying on top of that for sure. So
Michael, we have a question about transparency in the NCAA investigation. And, this is such a college football in general is not really known for its transparency. And now as we're experiencing this and there's so much, he said, she, whatever. And as Jalen noted, what's true and what's not. What advice might you have for these guys as they continue to move forward in covering a story like this? And what are you seeing from a national media perspective that is both and local that maybe we could learn from positively or negatively?
Yeah, well, college football is not known for transparency, and the University of Michigan is definitely not known for transparency, and that's been true for anyone that's submitted a FOIA request in the last 90 years. So I think the biggest piece of advice I would give anyone, generally, but specifically on this story, is don't just follow the mob. Don't just follow the horde of like this is the common narrative of anything. This is what people think. This is a good guy. This is a bad guy. This is that coaches around the league or around the country don't even necessarily know what happened, right? And so when you're polling people, there's an assumption they're a coach and they don't necessarily know exactly what happened, and I've been calling around to try to get a sense, because at first I was like, this looks really terrible, right? Like it looks like it's a major thing. And then I talked to other coaches who don't have a dog in the fight, as they say, and they were like, well, this, you do exchange information this way, you're not allowed to do it that way. They were adamant they just had found no way to believe that Harbaugh would have known anything, and I'm like, how could he not know? And then you start getting into like, well, someone's bringing you information in your program. How many coaches are then like questioning the source of it, So it's sort of a window, I think, into how a story blows up, and also how it's covered, and also a little bit into how college football works and how fan bases react. And Michigan's fan base has definitely been guilty of lately of acting like people are, it's all jealousy, or we're righteous and other people are cheating more, and this and like, one thing you learn in college sports, like everyone kind of has a hustle and everybody is going to act in their self-interest. And if you fall into the trap as a journalist that fans fall into of thinking my program that I cheer for is full of morally superior people to another program, that's not journalism. I mean, that's being a fan. And so we'll see exactly everything that happened. I would love for transparency when this is all done. I would love to know what happened, how it happened. Maybe there's just explosive stuff that hasn't come out yet, but that's sort of wait and see. In analyzing what we actually do know, that seems to have been lost a little bit here, at least to me.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think you make a great point, meaning to cut you off, Nicole, but I think that's the best piece of advice I can give anyone in this world is, having all the facts before you develop an opinion, especially when your opinion is going to be seen and read by, hundreds, thousands of people. But to speak a little bit on the Harbaugh situation, if anyone would, a half of a brain think that he didn't know what was potentially this going on, and not this situation, but if you don't know, if you think he don't know everything that's going on in his program, and I'm not just talking about this situation because, this still has to come out more information, but I give you guys an example. I was a freshman and I was driving back from Cleveland, Ohio to Columbus on a Thursday night, and I had a Friday 6 a.m. workout, and I was coming back with a buddy who was going to spend the weekend with me. It was my first time heading back to Cleveland from school. And my buddy went, hey, what's Ohio State? I might just come with me for the weekend and you'll see. And we got pulled over. I was speeding. And he had a warrant for his arrest for not showing up to court, actually for speeding as well. And we were in a city called Mansfield, which is right in between Cleveland and Columbus. And the officer did not take him to jail. He said, hey, we're not, just want to let you know, you might want to get that cleared up. He didn't even give me a ticket. That following morning, this happened at probably about 8:30, 9 o'clock at night. The following morning, I had a 6 a.m. workout. I'm probably in the building by 5:15. My coaches came to my locker and already knew what happened less than 12 hours ago, basically saying, hey, you dumbass, slow down. And, our coaches blow everything up. Like, why are you riding in a car with someone with a warrant and a criminal and all this other stuff? But that just goes you as a freshman who at that point had no opportunity to be and you look at the real chances of me really being on that campus and part of that program is already a long shot. So for me to be a person on that program who didn't add any value at that time. They knew what was going on. So if someone think a place like Michigan, Alabama, and Ohio State, these major universities, these head of these universities, usually are the football program coaches, don't know everything that's going on to continue to help them make $10 million a year, you must be crazy. And if this was Ohio State going through a similar or same scenario, I'll be responding the exact same way and calling for major consequences for the head coach. So I have no bias to the situation. I hate that this has came out to a game that I love so much, because it not just questions the integrity of the university and Harbaugh as a man, but the integrity of the game as well.
Absolutely. All right. Well, I could go on all day with this conversation, and I certainly wish we could. We're down to our last 2 minutes. And so I would want everyone to have a chance to give us their prediction of how they think that the game is going to go. So I'm going to randomly pick John to go first. What's your prediction, John?
Yeah, I think that the University of Michigan does kind of come back with its most complete team. I think in some warped and twisted way, Harbaugh has a bit of a motivating aspect, even if he's not on the sidelines. So I think the University of Michigan wins in a close one. I want to say 27-24.
All right. Charlie McDermott.
I honestly feel like both teams kind of got a chip on their shoulder right now. I like what John said. It's a 3-point game, but I also believe that Ohio State comes out victorious, not 27-24, but 30-27.
All right. Lauren.
Okay. Let me think on this for a second.
I can come back to you if you want.
No, it's okay. I think that being obviously like closer to Ohio State's program versus Michigan, I recognize the passion. And I do think it's really going to be a close game and think it's going to be low scoring. I'm going to have to say like 14-17. I think Ohio State is going to get back into the win column.
All right. Jayla.
I'm going to go with Charlie on 30-27. I think Marvin Harrison's going to have a huge game. I think he's, in a sense, going to make his Heisman, I guess, run in a sense in that game. So I have it 30-27.
All right. Charlie Papalardo.
Yeah, I think one of Michigan's few weak points is its secondary, and I think that it's not necessarily weak, but it's not as strong as the rest of its team. And with a guy like Marvin Harrison, there's really no room for error. I think it's going to be really tight, but I think kind of like John, I think 21-17, Ohio State takes it.
All right. Michael Rosenberg.
One thing I do not do in life is give gambling advice. I have no I don't know. I think, and this is just more from talking to people that within coaching or whatever, coaches that would know more than I would. I just think Michigan has an advantage along the lines. I do think that Ohio State, those receivers are so good that they just got to hit a couple of plays and that changes the whole game right there. So feels like a field goal game either way. I think Michigan being home and again having the advantage on the lines, I would go with them, but nothing would surprise me here.
All right, Tim May.
I think the Ohio State offense is on the rise. Specifically, I think Cal McCord is on the rise. He's much better, much more poised than he was, even 3 or 4 or 5 games ago. And they've managed to get by. And what he's proven along the way is he is a clutch quarterback. I like the way this offense is trending. I like the way the defense is playing. And I see Ohio State prevailing. It's really hard to get your head around what a score might be, but I could see it's not just the fact that they've got Marvin Harrison Jr. They've also got Cade Stover, Julian Fleming, and Emeka Egbuka on the offensive side of the ball, along with Travion Henderson. I mean, he can be a touchdown at any time if they open a seam. So I see Ohio State prevailing, maybe in a close game, maybe not, man, because one breakaway touchdown opens the floodgates, as we saw last year on the other side. People forget Ohio State led at halftime last year. So I can see Ohio State prevailing in this one.
All right, Cardell, last word here.
Yeah, I think you got two great teams, and I think we both mentioned their offenses, but you got two of the best defenses in the country. I think it's going to be 21-17. I do not know who's going to get that, but in my heart's telling me Ohio State, if they can force McCarthy to be a passer. And I think the big void is going to be missing Harbaugh on the sideline. I think you guys, no offense, never been in that situation of having a real live CEO on that sideline, and I don't think they have anyone else in that building outside of Jim Harbaugh who can really weather the storm on the sideline when things get to go left or right. So I got Ohio State 21-17.
Okay. Everyone, I thank you so much for being here with us, all of our guests, all of our people who joined us. We are so privileged to have spent this hour with you and getting these insights. Just a gentle reminder, the website is therivalry.com, where you can read all the stories from the Michigan Daily and the Lantern about this extraordinary rivalry in advance of the game, which of course is a week from Saturday. You can give some money if you are so inclined. We'd be ever so grateful to continue the incredible journalistic efforts of both of these amazing programs. So thank you so much for joining us. We wish you all the best. Happy Thanksgiving, and may the game be fulfilling for all of us. Thank you.
I enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thank you so much.